Hello, hello lovely people, and welcome back to another episode, installment, edition, part, I don't quite know what to call it, another part of Tarot to the Nines. And today we are talking not directly about tarot, but it's our last part of the Enneagram element of the Tarot to the Nines series. So today we are talking about the Gut Triad, the instinctive triad of the Enneagram, and we will of course go on and talk a bit about how it relates to tarot in a second. But first of all, let me just put this up a bit because you can't see everything you need to see on the board. So today we are talking about types 8, 9 and 1, and these are the instinctive types of the Enneagram. Let me get my little diagram to show you. You've seen this before, but just to remind you, here is the Enneagram. Oops. Let's just make it a bit more visible. There is the Enneagram, there's all the types around the Enneagram. It's divided into 3 different areas, and each of these different areas relates to a triad of Enneagram types, which describes the way that these types act in the world, the way that they operate in the world, the way that they engage with the world. And today we've already talked about the heart triad, coming from the heart. We've talked about the head triad, coming from the head, the mental capacities, and today we're talking about the instinctive triad, the gut triad, which are these types at the top of the Enneagram diagram, and they are types 8, 9 and 1. So in doing this part, we are bringing to a close our segment on the Enneagram that has been part of this series. And what we've been doing in the other videos, of course, as we'll do in this one, is looking at the types themselves, looking at how they operate when they're healthy and when they're not quite so healthy, looking at some of the characteristics that they have, looking at how they move, what kind of things happen to them when they are under stress or in a state of security, and how they can become a bit more like other types on the Enneagram diagram. And then we also look at what things they can do to make them healthy. And then we'll finish up the video by looking at how those types relate to the equivalent tarot cards. So of course we'll be looking at strength or justice, the hermit and the magician, and we'll be asking the question, do they relate directly to the equivalent major arcana cards or do they not? And since this is the last video in the Enneagram part of the series, although I will do a subsequent video where we'll look at Enneagram resources, which we can use as part of this course of study. But since it's the last video where we're going to be talking about the Enneagram in a bit more detail, I am going to come to a conclusion about whether I think that the types on the Enneagram do in fact or don't add up to and relate directly to the major arcana numbers. So watch this space because we're going to get there shortly. So let's have a look at the types themselves. So first of all, we're going to look at type number 8, and type number 8 is sometimes called the challenger, and it's sometimes called the boss. This is the assertive one of the Enneagram types. This is the one that is, well, as the name describes, it is somebody who challenges, it's somebody who can be quite bossy. It's somebody who very often takes the lead in situations. So many of you will know a type 8. You will know somebody who is always asserting themselves and is the leader in most situations. And you know, you might recognize some of these characteristics. So let's have a look. Probably it'd be better if I bring this a bit closer so you can see it. I hope that's okay. The important thing is you see the writing rather than me, I think. Although you probably can't read my writing because it's so terrible. Anyway, so the challenger boss, these are people who are assertive, but they can be aggressive as well. They tend to be people who are very just, so they have a strong sense of justice, a strong sense of rightness, which is partly what can lead to their assertiveness and sometimes their aggressiveness. And also they're very independent. They're independent people, they're independent thinkers. They very often are the kind of people that just won't go along with the crowd. They will be likely to be at the head of the pack, leading the crowd, in fact. When they are not feeling particularly healthy, when they are not very aware of their own drivers and their own egoic structures, if you like, because remember, each of the Enneagram types is an egoic structure. It is a structure that develops as a result of the entity, if you like, that is this human person moving away from wholeness, moving away from completeness, moving out of a state of non-duality into the world of duality, and the personality that forms as a result, the egoic structure that forms as a result, is one of these 9 types. And this one, if it is not aware of itself, it can become quite cynical. It can become almost bullying. However, if it is aware of itself, if it's self-aware, and if it's conscious of its egoic structure, it can be very protective and it can be very empowering. So, you know, you'll see this in healthy leaders, people who are 8s who are leading because they have this leadership type quality, but do it in a way that leaves their followers feeling not bossed around, but feeling appropriately led and appropriately empowered and protected. So that's if they're feeling healthy. If they're under stress, they have a tendency to move towards the more negative characteristics of a 5. It can be positive as well, but because it's stress, quite often it brings out the negative characteristics of 5. That's where they move on the Enneagram diagram. And you'll remember that the diagram is connected with various lines, and the lines on the diagram show where different types move between themselves, and one type can move to another. So number 8, when stressed, can go to number 5 and can become kind of vengeful and a bit rageful and attacking. If secure, actually they will become more like a 2. And 2s, of course, are very giving. They're the helpers of the Enneagram, and an 8 can become very like a 2. So it seems like quite a contrast, but it's not really. So when feeling secure, they go to 2. So what can an 8 do to ensure that it does feel secure and ensure that it is healthy? Well, one of the things that's good for an 8 to do, because they're very outwardly directed, and I'm doing this as though it's a head type, but it's not. It's a gut type. It's coming from down here. It's the gut, the solar plexus chakra. That's where the gut triad moves from. These people benefit from stillness and from meditation because they're not often very still. In fact, I know a number of 8s who would say that in their younger lives, their early lives, they tended to be on the go all the time, and maybe they still are, but they have learned to become more still and to become more introspective. So stillness and meditation can help to cultivate that kind of calmness. A good thing for an 8 to do is to notice when it is becoming angry, because anger is one of the things that an 8 can sometimes just fall into. And what 8s find is that anger doesn't scare them. 8s are very comfortable with anger. They're very comfortable with expressing anger, and they don't mind anger from other people. They can deal with that. They're not always very appreciative of the fact that other people do find anger stressful and difficult to deal with. So one of the things that they can do is they can use their anger, if they find themselves expressing it, as a trigger, a reminder to try and relax, a reminder to do the stillness and meditation that I just talked about. They can also practice listening. So an 8, because it is very outwardly directed in the world, often will talk more than it listens. So 8s would do well to cultivate the practice of listening to others and being still enough to let others have their say and to really take that in and listen to what others are telling them. And another good thing for an 8 to do is to record any self-insight. So if you are a number 8, and as I have been saying all of this stuff above, light bulbs are going on in your head or in your heart or in your gut, perhaps more appropriately. If those are insights that you feel are true to you, then write them down. Record them in your journal, note them down, and go back to them and just remind yourself of these insights. And of course your own self-insights. That is the number 8. Number 9, the peacemaker mediator. So these are people who are, again, as the name would describe, they are the harmonious types of the Enneagram. They are comfortable, they can be kind of apathetic, they can be stubborn because they're so placid they can actually be kind of immovable in a way. And at a more negative state of being, they can be kind of indecisive, to the point where they don't quite know what their own view of things are. They're very good at picking up on other people's views and understanding other people's perspectives, which is why they're so good at mediating. They're not always very good at understanding what their own motivations are, and it can be a life's work for a 9 to get in touch with their own motivations. When not very healthy, they can be needy and apathetic. When healthy, because they are so able to take on board other people's perspectives and understand them genuinely, they can be incredibly generous with their time and with their care and with their listening, and that can be very empowering for other people. When they are stressed, they have a tendency to move towards the number 6, and that can make them a bit fearful. 6s tend to be very motivated by fear. When the 9 is secure, they can move more towards the number 3. And this again is an interesting contrast, because 9s are kind of laid back and sometimes a bit apathetic and sometimes a bit head in the clouds, you might even say. 3s are quite directed. They know what they're about, they know what they're going for, they know what they want. And so when a 9 is feeling secure, a 9 can cultivate that and move towards that kind of way of being. So it seems like a contrast, but again, it's not. What can 9s do to be healthy and to be secure? They can take time to focus on their goals. Because they are so good at picking up on other people's goals and are not very good at understanding or picking up on their own, it's good for them to focus on their goals and write them down and study them and review them as they move forward. They need to learn to express their gut feelings. So a 9 will sometimes sit on its gut feelings because it doesn't feel confident that it should be sharing them with the world at large. It sometimes might even feel that other people's gut feelings are more important. So it's good to learn to express gut feelings as a 9, even though it might feel uncomfortable. Another thing a 9 should do is learn not to belittle itself. If you are a 9, you may have a tendency to make yourself small in comparison to other people's needs. And I'm not suggesting that you should completely flip that on the head and start making your needs above everyone else's, but you should learn to not belittle yourself and belittle your own needs. And then finally, another trigger, just as the number 8 should use anger as a trigger to remind it to relax, one of the things that the 9 can do is recognize passivity as a trigger to remind it to assert itself. And I mean assert, I don't mean aggress. So don't be aggressive, but be assertive. And use your passivity when you notice it as a trigger to remind yourself to be assertive. And that means sometimes, you know, again, it's a reminder to get in touch with the gut feelings. Because we don't assert ourselves if we don't have strong feelings. There's no need to. There's no motivation. So be in touch with your feelings as a 9, and that will allow you to become more assertive. And then finally, we have reached number 1. So we're back round to the top of the Enneagram again. And number 1 is the reformer or the perfectionist. Now, if you know a number 1, and I can think of some number 1s I have known in the years, you will know them because they are the kind of people who are pretty critical. And they're not critical just of you, they're critical of themselves as well. So they're critical of themselves and other people. They tend to be perfectionistic. So these are the people who, if they are, decorating something, let's say they're wallpapering, they will make sure the wallpaper is the most perfectly lined up it could be, and they will be driven mad, completely mad, if it is not perfect. They're likely to just strip it all off again and start from scratch. They can be serious because they're so perfectionistic. And they have such a deep sense of responsibility, they can be quite serious in the world. But not always. They're not always serious, as you'll see. From a negative point of view, if they're feeling unhealthy, not very aware of themselves, they can become judgmental and cold. But if they are aware of themselves, they can be extremely caring and extremely ethical. And that sense of responsibility and rightness really comes to the fore in a positive way. When under stress, they have a tendency to move toward number 4, and they can, in that, find a sense of unworthiness. But when they're secure, they can move much more towards the number 7, that kind of Epicurean approach, where they enjoy things and they become rather fun-loving and enthusiastic about things. And again, that can be an interesting contrast, because a 1, if they're feeling negative and insecure, probably don't come across as very enthusiastic because they're so critical. So when they're feeling secure, that enthusiasm that comes out of them and fun-loving nature that comes out of them can be quite a surprise, but it's definitely authentic, it's definitely there in a number 1. So what can number 1s do to be healthy and to be secure? They can learn to depersonalize issues. So number 1s tend to take things very personally, And I mean that in two ways. So either what they will do is, if they're criticizing themselves or if they get something wrong, they will see it as a personal failing on their part. But they'll also see the same for other people. So if someone else does something wrong or crosses them in some way, they're not very good at forgiving and forgetting. They are likely to hold a grudge, and they're likely to see it as a personal failing on the other person's part that they have transgressed in some way. So it's good for a number one to learn to depersonalize issues and recognize that sometimes they make mistakes and other people make mistakes just because. It's not a personal feeling, it's just one of these things. The other thing that's very good for them to do is to cultivate a both and mindset, because ones have a tendency to see the world in blacks and whites. They tend to have a very either or mindset. So cultivating that both and mindset and learning to hold contradictory perspectives in their minds and in their hearts at the same time is a good thing for them to do. Again, a trigger for them, a thing for them to notice, is when they're feeling resentful. When they have resentments about things, that should be a reminder to them to think about, am I in this black and white view, or can I see things from a sort of more shades of grey perspective? And then finally, a really good thing for ones to do, because they have got this capacity for being fun-loving and enjoying life, they should commit to playing, reminding themselves to play and have fun. And even if they don't particularly feel like it, if you as a one commit to that and remind yourself to do that, that can be a really healthy thing to do, and it can allow you to bring out all of the best qualities of your unique capacity in the world, because that's what each of the Enneagram types has. It has its own limitations because of the egoic structure that is built around it, but it also has wonderful capacity for bringing something marvelous into the world. And that's what these tips are about. It's about how can you be the best self that you can possibly be without changing your personality. You don't need to change your personality and turn into someone else in order to be happy in this life. What you need to learn to do is to cultivate and make the best of your own capacities, and that's what studying the Enneagram is all about for me. So now that we've gone through the gut triad, the instinctive triad, and we've looked at types 8, 9 and 1, I am going to clean some of the board, and we're going to have a look next at the tarot cards in relation to these types. So back in a sec. So back again, and now we're looking at how we can link together the different Enneagram types in the gut triad, the instinctive triad, with the tarot constellations that relate to the equivalent number. And that really has been what the whole of the Tarot to the 9 series has been about, of course. It's been looking at the constellations of number within the tarot deck, and there are 9 of them, and there are 9 Enneagram types, which is what led me to think about how I could link them together. And then I discovered, to my delight, that there was actually a book which did link them together, and it's this book which I've been working from in much of this series, and it's called The Fool's Excellent Adventure, A Hero's Journey Through the Enneagram and Tarot, and it's by Susan Rhodes, who has written other Enneagram books as well. Now, I'm sure there are very many Enneagram purists and probably some tarot purists and probably some Hero's Journey purists as well, mythology purists as well, who would think that you can't neatly link the tarot constellations with the Enneagram types and Hero's Journey. And they may well be right. I'm not sure that you can entirely neatly link them together. However, this book does indicate that it's possible to find linkages, because Susan Rhodes has done, I think, an excellent job and a very thorough job of looking at where the linkages are and what the linkages are. And so I do highly recommend it, even if you are a bit skeptical about being able to make the links. It's worth a look. So, and we're going to work on this. I'm going to talk to you a bit about the different types, but in order to do that, I'm going to put on my glasses, because I need my glasses. If ever, by the way, you see me trying to read in one of my videos and I haven't got my glasses on, please comment below and say, Brian, wear your glasses, because I do need to wear my glasses now, because otherwise I get eye strain, and which is not fun. And yeah, but I forget to do it. I forget to put them on, because my eyesight isn't terrible. It's just that I'm noticing now that I do need my glasses more. I need to get new glasses actually, because I've had these for a couple of years and I'm due another eye test. So I'll finally actually start wearing glasses, just at the point where I need to change them. So anyway, we're going to now have a look at type number 8, Challenger and Boss on the Enneagram, and this is the path of Ascension. And so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to read you some bits from this book, and it's going to give you some idea of how they fit together. And I'll do that for the others as well. And then at the end of this video, I'll just have a few words to say about whether I think ultimately it's useful to link the Enneagram and the tarot constellations or not. Okay, so number 8, Path of Ascension, and this pulls together the strength and the star, and what Susan Rhodes has done, and I don't think this deck is out yet, but she is putting together an Enneagram tarot deck, and she has created, because she's noticed that some of the tarot constellations, like this one for example, they have got 3 cards. I think I might be the only one. No, there's others that have got 3, haven't they? I don't even know what I'm talking about now. The point is that she notices that some of them don't have 3 cards, and so, in other words, some of them are not they don't complete a 9 base. So, because there aren't enough cards in the major arcana to be multiplied by 9, even though there are 9 constellations. So what she's done is she's created some new major arcana cards, and they will be in her deck. And here we have the major arcana card, which is number 26, because of course 2 and 6 adds up to 8, and this is the Divine Monad. And I will talk a bit more about this in a future video, but just to give you an idea, she adds that in to the tarot constellation. So, Path of Ascension. Strength is an attribute ever popular with heroes, both physical strength and courage. Give them the necessary fortitude to both survive the journey and to triumph over adversity. But strength as a key depicts a strange image. A beatific woman clothed in white for purity, with a figure 8 lemniscate over her head, a sign of eternity and reciprocity. Check out my video on number 8 for more on the lemniscate. Bedecked in roses, devotion, she leans over a great red lion holding its mouth with her hand. Yes, it's really red, although it looks orange in most coloured cards. This is the red lion of desire, the part of our desire nature that is wild, free and potentially predatory. Untamed, it can ruin our lives. Tempered by love, it can be a creative force that we use to accomplish the great work of transformation. This key depicts the reciprocal relationship between love and the instinct. Now you will remember in the earlier part of this video I spoke about the fact that number 8s can be quite passionate and assertive and sometimes need to temper that in order to not do themselves or others harm. And you really kind of see that represented here. So then she goes on to talk a bit more about the Enneagram element itself. The chivalric code is an ideal that 8s on the Enneagram can readily relate to, for while they are the most charismatic, powerful and instinctually driven type on the Enneagram, they are potentially the most devoted. Like the knights of the Middle Ages, they instinctively seek an object worthy of their devotion because they understand in their gut, remember this is a gut type, the reciprocal relationship between love and power, how balancing the two can manifest great changes. 8s are known for their leadership, dominance and sheer animal magnetism. They lead in a highly personal way, etc, etc, etc. The difficulty can be in finding something or someone in life that truly inspires them. It can't be any old thing, it has to be something worthy of their devotion. Both type 8 on the Enneagram and key 8 in the tarot are specifically associated with the quality of lust. In the Enneagram community, lust is often said to be the vice associated with type 8, although 8s themselves don't necessarily see it as a vice because it's also a powerful motivating energy. In the tarot, Aleister Crowley calls the strength key by the name of lust. So it's not surprising. His Thoth deck shows the woman boldly riding a lion, not just touching its mouth. And it's likely that Crowley preferred the image of lust inflamed by passion to the image of lust tempered by love. On the Enneagram, point 8 is directly linked with point 2, that's lust and love, through the inner line that connects them. And point 2 is said to be the heart point of 8, an influence that brings out its gentler, more tender side. You'll remember from the earlier part of the video, I said that 8s, when they were feeling secure, moved towards 2. And then it talks a bit about also the star. If the vice for 8s is lust, the virtue is innocence, as depicted in the star. And then, does it say any more there? Yeah, so the star symbolises the possibility that the innocence they lost early in life can be fully restored to them, so they can once again drink freely from the waters of life. For this to happen, they must willingly take down their formidable defences, so that the walls they have erected for protection do not block the light of their own inner star. 𝙑𝙄𝙉𝙆𝙎 who can summon up the courage to let their guard down can experience both improved relationships and a renewed sense of hope for the future. And then just a little bit about this divine monad that she has created for her deck. She said the divine monad represents the complete unification of the incarnated human being in all of its many aspects. The masculine self at 1, the feminine self at 2, the creative self at 3, the personal self at 4, the alchemical self at 5, the balanced self at 6, and self as light body at 7. There is also a pre-self at point 0, which represents the fool on the cusp of becoming a self, and a post-self at point 9, which represents the fool on the cusp of moving from selfhood to a state beyond the self. And you remember from the video on 9, I talked about the 9s being at this point of near completion and being about to flip up into a new level of being, and that's what she's relating to here. Key 26 symbolises the apex of what is possible in the evolution of a single human being, the individual with the power to fully incarnate his potential. And then it goes on to say a bit more about the Enneagram element. Enneagram 8s represent both the lowest and the highest potential in a human being. They have both the strongest instinctual appetites and the greatest potential to render service to all life. Once those appetites have been raised up and directed towards some worthwhile goal. The path of an 8 is never easy, because it involves powerful energies that tend to push an individual to extremes. The only way to work with such power is to go beyond mere self-discipline, which will curb but never tame the beast, to discover the only force powerful enough to effect genuine transformation, the unlimited power of love. Nothing else will suffice. But 8s who have the courage to confront the raw power of instinct and the patience to learn how to make that power his servant can realise the degree of inner development that is available to only the very few. So that is the 8s. So now moving on to number 9, the path of divine possibility, the number 9 on the Enneagram being the peacemaker and mediator. Now this one is rather interesting because, I've forgotten to put it on. I knew there was another one that had 3. So this path is unique in possessing 4 keys, not 3. This is because it includes the Fool, which plays a unique archetypal role, because and the reason that they're talking about this one, including the Fool, is that in this book, the Fool on the Enneagram diagram, now let me just step back a bit. You might remember we talked about the Fool being part of the constellation of the Emperor before, because the Fool could be number 22, and 2 and 2 is 4, so it's part of the constellation of the Emperor. In this book and in her Enneagram theory, what she's saying is that the 0 actually represents the Fool represents point 0, which is the same as point 9 on the Enneagram. So if you go all the way around the Enneagram, you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 9 is also the 0 point, so it's the beginning and the end, which is why she includes the Fool in this constellation. So the path is unique in possessing 4 keys, not 3. This is because it includes the Fool, which plays a unique archetypal role. The Fool is the ultimate symbol of paradox in my imagined tarot of the Enneagram, and that's what she is talking about. So her Fool is, her imagination of the Fool is that it has this archetypal role. It can be either the first key or the last key, the every key or the no key, the foolish fool who strives earnestly to complete the journey, or the wise fool, the open to life experiencer who has no goals. Although this key can be described, it can never be pinned down. As a result, the Fool will always stand apart from the other 27 keys in the major tarot. She's got 27 keys in her tarot. We cannot leave it out of the 9 paths, but we cannot fully include it either. So what she's saying here about the Fool is 𝙍𝙉𝙉 offers a particularly apt representation of type 9 on the Enneagram. Young 9s tend to have exactly the same carefree, easygoing attitude about life, so they often start out by following more decisive friends with goals that 9s will happily borrow until they find something better. Once they get going, even on someone else's path, they tend to keep going as long as their experiences seem agreeable. And then the Hermit is the second archetype, and the Hermit represents the unfolding of the mystical potential of the 9. One of the gifts of the 9 is an innate understanding of the rhythms of the natural world. 9s almost always feel at home in nature, even in wild places far from civilization. They often find it initially hard to look within, but once they do, they find a natural oneness that appeals to their harmony-seeking nature. As hermits, 9s discover that the world of outer experience reflects an even more interesting world within, a realization that will stay with them when they descend back into the valley of ordinary night. The third key on the journey of the 9 is the Moon, which represents the very last stage in the arc of the night. She talks about the arc of the day and the arc of the night in this book. I won't go into all that detail yet, but it's worth getting the book if you want to know more. As the last key before the return of the light, the Moon naturally represents many challenges. It tests the hero's will to persevere both mentally and physically under extreme duress. And this tests the 9's ability to override his happy wanderer tendencies. Let's see. 9s find pain hard to deal with. This is not because they're wimps, but because it seriously disrupts their sense of oneness with life. That's why they tend to fuzz out and let go of their inner attention, so they can go unconscious to anything that might create a sense of separation. But if they fall asleep here, their night journey is sure to come to an unfortunate end. 9s also have some qualities that will serve them well on the journey home. They're adaptable to changing conditions, and they instinctively know how to roll with the punches and just keep going. And then she has created another key, and this is trump number 27, because 2 and 7 makes 9. And this one is Divine Mystery in her imagined tarot of the Enneagram. And what it says about Divine Mystery is this symbolises our understanding of life at the completion of the journey, which is why the Fool is at the completion point of the 9, if there is such a thing as completion. It depicts the highest octave of the Fool, and thus the point of origin for not only the Fool but the entire tarot. In Kabbalah it is the Ein, which literally means no in Hebrew. In Sufi mysticism, Allah means the great nothing. In the Enneagram, key 27 symbolises the 0 point on the top of the circle. It expresses the mystery that everything in the created cosmos came from the uncreated. It is also the first principle that governs the existence of every human being. And she says a bit more about the Enneagram type. It is interesting to me that there is an actual Enneagram type, type 9, that embodies the archetype of the Divine Mystery. Because if point 0 symbolises the nothingness, how can it also be a temperament type? This is yet another paradox that remains unexplained. However, type 9 clearly exists. It serves as the root type out of which all the other 8 types arise. And you find in Enneagram studies that very often people who are type 9 really struggle to identify their type because they find it so easy to identify with all of the other types. And as I've said before in previous videos on the Enneagram, we are all of those types, but we have a preference for one type. We are more one type than others. 9s are, if anything, are of all of the types probably most balanced in their distribution of types, if you like. 9s tend to resist the process of individuation because it means becoming less identified with oneness. And then she talks about some of her experiences of dealing with people who've got that type. Mature 9s are the ones who are brave enough to undertake the hero's journey of separation, to walk 3 times around the Enneagram circle, finally making their way home to their point of origin. So if you were to go 3 times round, that's 27 types, 27 major arcana cards. Upon their return, they find themselves able to experience the Divine Mystery in an entirely new way. Instead of unconsciously losing themselves in forgetfulness, they now remember who they are and the nature of their divine heritage. The nature of this state is captured in the remarks of 𝙍𝙀𝙎𝙊𝙍𝙀𝙊 Rinpoche on the last of the Zen ox herding pictures. And this is a quote. Nirmanyaka, the absence of self-nature, is the fully awakened state of being in the world. Its action is like the moon reflecting in 100 bowls of water. The moon has no desire to reflect, but that is its nature. The state is dealing with the earth with ultimate simplicity, not following the example of anyone. You destroy whatever needs to be destroyed, you subdue whatever needs to be subdued, and you care for whatever needs your care. So that point, the point 9, ends the hero's journey around the Enneagram, because of course it's the last point, and it's therefore the first point again. And just as I said in the video for the 9, that to some extent the 9 takes us back to the 0, because it's nothingness, but spinning up in the spiral into a new level. So it takes us both to the 10, because that's the next number obviously in sequence, but it also takes us back to the 0 because we have gone as far as we can with new numbers with the 9. So there's something fundamentally complete about the 9, and that's reflected in this text as well. So now we are going to go back to, and I should just show you, by the way, sorry, there on the back of the thing, that's why the Fool is on the 9 point, because 9, she actually calls this the path of the Fool rather than the path of the Hermit, which is kind of interesting. So you've got the path of the Magician, the path of the High Priestess for 2, path of the Empress for 3, path of the Emperor for 4, path of the Hierophant for 5, Lovers for the 6, 7 is the Charioteer, 8 is Strength, and 9 is the Fool, not the Hermit. But that's because in her way of looking at this, then they are all part of the same constellation. Whereas in the tarot constellations concept, the Fool would actually fit in the constellation of the Emperor. So that is one of your first clues, that whilst there are connections between the tarot cards and the major arcana and the Enneagram, do they match directly and exactly with the tarot constellations? No. Both systems are unique in their own right, but there are connections. So just to finish, we're going to go back to number 1, which is the beginning of the sequence of paths, obviously, in this concept. But from the point of view of looking at the Enneagram types, what I've done is I've looked at them in triads, and because we started with the Heart Triad, which is 2, 3, and 4, and then we did the Head Triad, which is 5, 6, 7, and then we've done the Gut Triad, which is 8, 9, 1. We've gone back to 1. But 1 is the beginning, obviously, of the paths. So this is the path of alchemy. And it says here, like magicians, Enneagram 1s have the fiery will to make things happen, and the innate understanding that their actions must be guided by some greater law or principle. Remember that perfectionism and seriousness? They live in an intense inner world of ideal forms, which they are always comparing with the outer world of the real. The latter is usually judged to be inferior and in need of correction. That's a very type 1 thing to do. Thus they are very ethically minded. But whether this makes them more ethical in practice depends upon their ability to translate their ideals into action, because their very quest for perfection can potentially cause them to mistake personal ideals for a divine edict, the will of the people, etc. So it's especially important for this type to cultivate a sense of proportion in order that their upright stance does not become the rigid pose of a martinet. The Wheel of Fortune is very different in appearance from Key 1. The central image is circular, not linear. The arrangement of images looks disorderly, not tidy. The sky is cloudy, not clear. And there are strange creatures doing strange things, like reading books. Here I am, reading books. There are also mysterious symbols on the wheel, not just the 4 workmanlike tools. So there are some differences, and Enneagram 1s would find it easy to understand the magician's initial difficulty with the wheel, for they are probably the most serious, rule-oriented type on the Enneagram. Many times they even look the part, all sharp angles and straight lines, especially in the face. Margaret Hamilton's Wicked Witch of the West is a perfect example. As a result, they don't have an easy time transitioning from rule-oriented living to a more spontaneous, in-the-moment lifestyle. Youthful ones can seem like old heads on one's shoulders, overly mature for their age and very literal-minded. Yes, and then it goes on to say a little bit more about the sun. And Enneagram ones who learn how to combine the self-discipline of the magician with the ability to roll with the punches and a good sense of humour of the wheel, find that life is warmer and sunnier than they could ever have imagined. The more they allow themselves to relax and accept life for what it is, remember that both and perspective rather than either or, the more life shows them its everyday treasures. The personal happiness that they experience is as welcome as it is unexpected. So that is just a very quick canter through Susan Rhodes's excellent summary of how the Enneagram types relate to the different tarot constellations. Lots of interesting stuff in there. And I said I would close with my perspective on, do I think that there is a link? And the answer is, I think it's clear from her book, and it's clear from some of what I've read, that yes, there is a link. You can take the Enneagram types and you can relate them to their equivalent tarot constellations, and you will find very enlightening connections, and it's worth exploring. What I would say, and I've kind of already said it, but I will reiterate, that as well as having the potential to connect together as systems, they are also individual separate systems. So, you could, for example, see ways in which the Hermit, whilst it's like type 9, in other ways it's very like type 5. Whereas the Magician obviously fits in with type 1 very clearly, there are actually some similarities between the Magician and type 8 and type 3 in terms of getting things done, being active in the world. So I would say the Enneagram has more richness to it than you would think if you let the tarot constellations limit your perception of the Enneagram. And equally, the tarot constellations and the tarot major arcana have far more richness and potential to them than you would think if you let the Enneagram types limit your perspective of them. So it's like both of these systems are massive in their scope and hugely enlightening in their scope. And when you bring them together, it's like a Venn diagram. There's the Enneagram over here, there's the tarot constellations over here, and there is a very definite point where they meet and where there's a great deal of worthwhile exploration to be had in that central part of the Venn diagram. But there's also large areas where the connection is not as apparent, and you can study them absolutely in their own right, or together collectively. So that has been my canter through the different triads of the Enneagram, and I hope that's been useful to you. I've kind of finished my comments on the Enneagram now, but we will in a future video, maybe the next one or the one after, as part of the look at our resources that we can use to support our study of tarot to nines. I will come back to the Enneagram in terms of some of the useful books and resources that you can take a look at if you are interested in knowing more. So I hope you found this useful, particularly if you're a type 8, 9 or 1, or if your tarot constellations are 8, 9 or 1. But even if you aren't, then I hope you've enjoyed it. I've certainly enjoyed making it. And thank you again for being here. And until next time, look after yourselves. I'll see you again very soon. Bye.